The words are simple. I didn't do it. They've been spoken in courtrooms, interrogation rooms, prison cells, and execution chambers. Sometimes whispered, sometimes shouted, sometimes said calmly, as if repetition might finally turn belief into truth. And sometimes, they are the very last words a person ever speaks. Across the United States, the United Kingdom, and Canada, cases exist where condemned individuals maintain their innocence until the end. Not halfway through appeals, not until public attention faded, but all the way to the final moment. This chapter is not about proving guilt or innocence. It's about what happens when certainty fractures. The justice system is built on conclusions, verdicts, final judgments, sentences that signal closure. But innocence claims disrupt that structure. They introduce doubt into a system designed to eliminate it. And doubt is uncomfortable. When a person insists on innocence at the end of the process, it forces everyone involved, officials, witnesses, the public, to confront a terrifying possibility. What if the system didn't just punish, but erase the wrong person? That question alone has kept millions watching, commenting, and debating long after the cases themselves were officially closed. Many people assume innocence claims are rare or desperate tactics. They aren't. In fact, a significant number of death row inmates have maintained innocence from the moment of arrest until execution. Some never confessed. Some rejected plea deals that would have spared their lives because admitting guilt felt like another kind of death. Imagine being offered life, but only if you say you committed a crime you believe you didn't. What would you choose? That question sits at the heart of this chapter. Innocence claims take many forms. Some are rooted in mistaken identity, others in faulty forensic evidence. Some arise from coerced confessions, unreliable witnesses, or legal representation that failed under pressure. These are not abstract ideas. They are documented realities that have led to exonerations, sometimes decades later. And that's what makes executions involving innocence claims so haunting. Because exoneration cannot arrive after death. For families of the condemned, innocence claims create a unique kind of suffering. They live in a permanent state of unresolved belief. Hope never fully dies, but it also never fully survives. Each appeal becomes a lifeline. Each denial becomes another fracture. Many families describe time slowing to a crawl, every year feeling heavier than the last. And when the system moves forward anyway, the silence afterward is deafening. If you're watching this and thinking about family, you're not alone. That's where many viewers pause and reflect. For victims' families, innocence claims can reopen wounds they thought were sealed. Some feel anger, believing the claim disrespects their loss. Others feel confusion when new evidence surfaces. Some feel torn between grief and doubt. The public often expects certainty from victims' families. Reality is far more complicated, and this complexity is rarely captured in headlines. One of the most powerful moments in these cases occurs during final statements. Some condemned individuals use that moment to express forgiveness, others to speak to family, and some, quietly, firmly, repeat their innocence one last time. There is no drama in those moments, just presence, and that's why they stay with people. Psychologists note that people who maintain innocence until death often exhibit a different emotional profile than those who accept guilt. There is less closure, less narrative resolution, more unfinished business. For witnesses, this creates a lasting discomfort, a sense that something was interrupted rather than concluded. That discomfort often turns into curiosity. Curiosity turns into research. Research turns into documentaries like this one. In recent years, DNA evidence has reshaped how innocence claims are viewed. Cases once considered airtight have unraveled decades later. Witnesses recanted. Evidence degraded. New testing revealed truths no one could access at the time of trial. This has permanently altered public trust. Even people who strongly support the justice system now ask harder questions. And once those questions start, they don't stop easily. What makes innocence claims especially compelling is that they resist simple storytelling. There is no clean villain, no guaranteed hero, just people navigating a system built by other people, all of them fallible. This is why these cases trend, not because they shock, but because they destabilize certainty. As this chapter closes, understand this. Innocence claims are not about rewriting history. They are about examining how history was written in the first place. And once you start looking closely, it becomes impossible to unsee the cracks. Before moving forward, consider this quietly. If even one innocent person is executed, what does justice become? That question follows us into the next chapter, where we examine the evidence, the mistakes, and the moments that turn doubt into destiny. Every conviction has a foundation, a collection of facts, statements, timelines, and interpretations that form what the court accepts as truth. Once that foundation is laid, everything else is built on top of it: appeals, sentences, final decisions. But what happens when the foundation itself is unstable? This chapter is about the evidence that ends lives and the uncomfortable reality that evidence is not the same as certainty. Most people believe evidence is objective: fingerprints, witnesses, confessions, forensic reports. These sound definitive, scientific, beyond dispute. But evidence does not exist in a vacuum. It is collected by people, interpreted by people, and presented by people, all of whom bring assumptions, pressure, and limitation into the process. That human layer changes everything. And in innocence claim cases, it becomes impossible to ignore. One of the most common pillars of wrongful convictions is eyewitness testimony. It feels powerful. A person stands in court and says, "That's the one." Jurors trust confidence. They trust memory. They trust certainty in another human voice. But decades of research have shown that memory is not a recording. It is a reconstruction. Stress, fear, suggestion, and time all distort recall. Yet for years, eyewitness testimony alone was enough to sentence people to death. That fact still unsettles viewers when they learn it. Confessions are another cornerstone and another minefield. The public often assumes no one would confess to a crime they didn't commit. But reality tells a different story. Long interrogations, psychological pressure, exhaustion, fear, and promises of relief can break people in ways most of us can't imagine. Some confessed believing it would end the questioning. Some believed the truth would emerge later. Some didn't fully understand what they were agreeing to. And once a confession exists, everything else begins to bend around it. Forensic evidence carries enormous weight, but it is not infallible. Hair analysis, bite mark comparisons, blood pattern interpretation. Many techniques once presented as scientific fact have since been questioned or discredited. In some cases, experts overstated certainty. In others, outdated methods were used because better ones didn't yet exist. At the time, juries didn't know this. Neither did judges. And once a verdict is reached, reversing it becomes extraordinarily difficult. Prosecutorial narratives play a powerful role. Trials are not just about evidence. They are about stories. Who seems believable? What explanation feels complete? Which version of events fits together cleanly? When prosecutors build a compelling narrative early, contradictory evidence can be minimized, explained away, or excluded entirely. This doesn't require bad intent. It only requires momentum. And momentum is one of the most dangerous forces in the justice system. Defense quality often determines outcomes more than guilt or innocence. In many innocence claim cases, defendants relied on underfunded, overworked, or inexperienced legal representation. Missed objections, unchallenged evidence, untested forensic claims. These gaps don't always show up clearly in trial transcripts, but they echo loudly in hindsight. The difference between life and death can come down to resources. That reality changes how people watch these stories. Appeals are often misunderstood by the public. Many assume appeals re-examine guilt. In reality, they often focus on procedure. Was the trial fair? Were rules followed? Was counsel adequate under the law, not under ideal conditions? This means new evidence can exist and still fail to overturn a sentence. For viewers, this is often the moment belief in the system begins to fracture. Once a conviction is secured, the standard shifts. Instead of proving guilt, the burden becomes proving error, and not just any error, but one severe enough to overturn a final judgment. Doubt alone is not enough, and that threshold has kept innocence claims trapped for decades. DNA evidence changed everything, but not for everyone. Some cases lacked preserved evidence. Some evidence was lost. Some never involved biological material to begin with. For those individuals, DNA could not come to the rescue. And when execution dates were set, time became the enemy. One of the most haunting aspects of innocence claim cases is how ordinary the errors often are. A misfiled report, an assumption left unchallenged, a witness mistaken but sincere. No conspiracy required. Just small failures stacking into irreversible outcomes. Public opinion tends to harden once a verdict is reached. People want closure. They want finality. Revisiting guilt feels destabilizing, as if reopening the case reopens pain. But truth does not obey timelines. And when new information surfaces, it demands attention whether we're ready or not. For the condemned maintaining innocence, evidence becomes both enemy and obsession. They study transcripts, reread testimony, memorize inconsistencies, not because they expect vindication, but because understanding becomes a way to survive psychologically. Knowledge gives structure to uncertainty, and uncertainty is relentless. As this chapter draws to a close, one reality becomes unavoidable. Evidence can convince a jury. It can persuade a judge. It can withstand appeals and still be wrong. That truth does not dismantle justice, but it demands humility from it. Before moving forward, consider this. If evidence is filtered through human judgment at every step, how much certainty is enough to end a life? In the next chapter, we examine the final stretch, when doubts remain, options narrow, and time begins to run out. There is a point in every innocence claim case where the conversation changes. Not because new evidence disappears, not because questions are answered, but because time begins to dominate everything else. This is the chapter where doubt still exists, but options begin to vanish. In the early years of a case, doubt feels active. It moves. It argues. It files motions. It gathers affidavits. It waits for hearings. There is momentum, even if it's slow, even if it's painful, even if it feels unfair. But as years pass, doubt changes shape. It becomes heavier, quieter, less visible, and eventually, it starts competing with something far more powerful than truth: finality. The justice system values finality deeply, not because it is cruel, but because it is built to function. Courts cannot revisit every case indefinitely. Appeals have limits. Deadlines exist. Procedures narrow. The system begins asking a different question. Not, is this person innocent? But have all legal steps been exhausted? That shift is subtle and devastating. For those maintaining innocence, this is when pressure intensifies. Appeals are denied not because innocence is disproven, but because the court determines there is no legal pathway left to examine it. The difference between those two outcomes is enormous, but often lost on the public. To an outside observer, denial looks like confirmation. To the condemned, it feels like erasure. As execution dates approach, everything accelerates. Legal teams scramble. New filings are rushed. Evidence is re-reviewed. Witnesses are contacted again, sometimes decades after the original events. Memories have faded. Records are incomplete. Some people involved have passed away. Time, which once allowed for hope, now works against it. For families of the condemned, this stage is unbearable. Hope becomes fragile. Every phone call feels urgent. Every update feels final. They learn legal language they never wanted to understand. They memorize timelines they wish didn't exist. And still they wait. Waiting becomes a form of endurance. Public attention often peaks during this phase. Petitions circulate. Media outlets revisit the case. Documentaries air. Social platforms fill with arguments. Supporters and critics speak with equal certainty, often without the same information. For the condemned, this attention can be both lifeline and burden, because attention does not stop the clock. One of the most misunderstood aspects of this stage is clemency. Clemency is not a retrial. It does not determine innocence or guilt. It is an act of mercy, discretionary, political, and deeply influenced by timing and optics. Some see it as a safeguard. Others see it as a last hope. But it is not guaranteed. And it does not require certainty, only authority. As deadlines close in, legal arguments become increasingly narrow. Courts examine whether evidence could have been presented earlier, whether procedures were followed correctly, whether errors meet an extremely high threshold. The standard is no longer reasonable doubt. It is extraordinary proof. And that difference changes everything. For viewers, this is often the most frustrating part of the story. Because doubt remains, but momentum favors conclusion. People watching from the outside ask a simple question. If there is still doubt, why proceed? The system answers with a more complex one. If we stop now, where does it end? Between those two questions lies the tension that defines this chapter. As execution dates draw closer, the condemned often enters a psychological shift. Some become quieter, some more focused, Some withdraw entirely. Others speak more openly than ever, not because they expect rescue, but because time feels clarified. They are no longer arguing for acquittal. They are arguing for recognition. That distinction matters. This is also when innocence claims become most controversial. Supporters frame them as warnings. Opponents frame them as delays. Neutral observers struggle to choose a side. The closer the end comes, the less room there is for nuance. And nuance is where truth often lives. Legal teams face impossible decisions. Which argument has the highest chance? Which claim risks backfiring? Which evidence might actually hurt the case if scrutinized again? When time runs out, strategy becomes survival. And even the best strategy may fail. For victims' families, this stage reopens wounds. Media attention resurges. Names resurface. Details return to public conversation. Closure, once assumed, becomes conditional again. Some families want the process to end. Others want answers, even if those answers are unsettling. There is no single emotional response, and expecting one does harm. The public often expects clarity at this stage. They want a final revelation, a smoking gun, a definitive answer. What they usually get instead is ambiguity, doubt without resolution, and that unsettles people far more than certainty ever could. As execution day approaches, courts sometimes issue last-minute stays. Phones ring late into the night. News alerts break. Supporters gather. Opponents respond. Time slows, then suddenly rushes. And sometimes, after all of it, the stay is lifted. Silence follows. For those who believed in the innocence claim, this moment is crushing. Not because they are proven wrong, but because proof is no longer relevant. The process has ended, and endings do not require agreement. This is the stage where the question changes again. Not did we get it right, but can we live with the possibility that we didn't? That question does not disappear after the execution. It lingers. As this chapter closes, understand this. Doubt does not disappear when time runs out. It simply loses its voice. And when doubt is silenced by procedure rather than answered by truth, its echo grows louder, not quieter, over time. Before moving forward, sit with this. If a system values finality more than certainty, what does justice ask us to accept? The next chapter examines what happens when the end arrives, and innocence is still being claimed. The final day does not arrive suddenly. It has been approaching for years. Appeals denied. Motions exhausted. Dates scheduled, postponed, rescheduled. Every delay teaches the mind not to trust time. Every new order teaches the heart to brace. So when the final day finally arrives, it feels both unreal and inevitable. For the condemned who maintains innocence, the final day is not about guilt or punishment. It is about presence. The morning begins like any other. Lights, movement, routine sounds, the ordinary rhythms of a place designed to suppress distinction between days. But beneath the routine, something has shifted. Everyone knows. Staff, attorneys, administrators, chaplains, guards. No announcements are needed. The air itself feels different. Procedures dominate the hours. Meals offered, paperwork reviewed, notifications delivered. Each step follows protocol precisely, not to dehumanize, but to maintain control. Systems depend on order, especially when the outcome is irreversible. For the condemned, these procedures become markers in time. Each one quietly signals how close the end has come. Legal teams remain active. Even now, phone calls continue. Motions may still be filed. Courts may still be contacted. No effort is considered too late until it is officially declared so. Hope does not disappear, it narrows. It becomes focused on minutes rather than months. Family visits, when allowed, are among the most emotionally complex moments of the entire process. There is no script for what to say when time has an end point. Conversations drift between memory and normalcy. Small talk exists alongside gravity. Some families speak about the future even though it will not include the person they are seeing. Others avoid the word goodbye entirely. For those maintaining innocence, these conversations carry an added weight. They are not only saying goodbye, they are leaving behind a claim unresolved. That distinction matters deeply to them. Spiritual advisors often play a central role during this time. Not all condemned individuals are religious. Not all want counsel. But many seek structure, something to anchor the mind as certainty collapses. Faith, reflection, silence, and ritual each offer different kinds of grounding. There is no single response, only coping. The media presence intensifies as the day progresses. News outlets prepare. Statements are drafted. Cameras wait beyond walls that will not open. Public interest peaks here, but the experience inside remains private, controlled, and contained. The separation between public narrative and personal reality becomes absolute. For prison staff, the final day is not routine. Even for those who have witnessed it before, training prepares them for procedure, not for meaning. Many focus intensely on tasks to avoid thinking beyond the checklist. Professionalism becomes a shield, not against responsibility, but against emotion. As evening approaches, time compresses. The condemned is moved according to protocol. Observers are notified. Officials confirm readiness. Documentation is checked and rechecked. Everything must be correct. There is no margin for error. In innocence claim cases, the final hours often include one last effort to be heard. Statements are prepared, letters written, words chosen carefully, not to argue, but to be remembered accurately. Some proclaim innocence openly. Others choose quiet dignity. Some speak of love, others of forgiveness, some of doubt. There is no right final message, only authenticity. Witnesses observe in silence. Their presence serves a legal purpose, to ensure the process follows the law. But witnessing also creates memory. Those who attend often carry the experience long after. It is not a passive role. It is a responsibility. The moment itself is not the focus of this chapter, because the moment is not where meaning lives. Meaning lives in what remains afterward. After the process concludes, the room empties. Officials file reports. Media releases statements. Families receive notifications. Supporters respond with grief or anger. Opponents speak of closure. The world resumes motion. But something has changed. For families of the condemned, the hours after are disorienting. Grief is mixed with disbelief. Relief does not always come, even when the waiting has ended. Innocence claims complicate mourning, leaving unanswered questions suspended forever. There is no appeal beyond this point. For victims' families, reactions vary. Some feel relief. Some feel exhaustion. Some feel unresolved pain. Others feel nothing at all and wonder why. No reaction is universal. Expecting one creates silence where honesty should exist. Public conversation follows predictable patterns. Arguments flare. Opinions harden. Sides defend their conclusions. Headlines simplify complexity. But complexity does not disappear simply because the process has ended. It only becomes harder to confront. For innocence claim cases, the final day does not close the story. It freezes it. Evidence remains contested. Questions remain unanswered. Doubt remains alive, even if the subject of that doubt is gone. And that reality challenges how societies understand justice. Over time, these cases often return. In documentaries, in academic studies, in reform debates, in newly uncovered evidence that arrives too late to help the person at the center. The final day ends a life. It does not end the conversation. This chapter leaves us with an uncomfortable truth. Justice systems are designed to conclude. Truth is not. And when those two timelines collide, the result is not clarity, but legacy. As we prepare to move into the final chapter, consider this. If innocence is still being claimed at the end, who carries that claim forward? And what responsibility does the rest of society hold once the process is complete? In the final chapter, we examine what remains, memory, reform, and the lasting impact of irreversible decisions. When the process ends, silence follows. Not immediately. There are statements, reactions, headlines, arguments. Noise fills the space where certainty is expected to exist. But once the cameras move on and the legal machinery shuts down, something quieter takes over. Absence. The person at the center of the case is no longer present to speak, to clarify, to defend, or to evolve. Their voice has been removed from the conversation, not because it was resolved, but because it no longer fits within the structure of the system. And yet, the story does not end. It changes form. In innocence claim cases, silence carries weight. It is not the silence of closure, but the silence of unfinished business. Questions linger without a living subject to answer them. Evidence remains frozen in time. Arguments remain unresolved. The absence itself becomes part of the record. Families of the condemned live with a complicated inheritance. They carry grief, loss, and memory, but also advocacy. Some become activists. Others withdraw entirely. Many do both at different times. They replay conversations, revisit documents, re-examine timelines, not because they expect reversal, but because understanding becomes a way to survive. Silence forces them to speak instead. For victims' families, the aftermath is equally complex. Execution does not erase trauma. It does not rewind time. It does not restore what was taken. For some, it offers a sense of completion. For others, it creates a new emotional chapter they did not anticipate. Especially when innocence claims persist, the narrative becomes fractured. Two families carry loss, but in different forms. And society often struggles to hold space for both. Public memory is selective. Cases that once dominated headlines slowly fade. New stories replace old ones. Attention moves on, but the consequences remain, embedded in records, policies, and lives permanently altered. This selective memory is part of how systems sustain themselves. Without forgetting, they would collapse under their own weight. Yet some cases refuse to disappear. They resurface years later, through journalism, academic review, or new forensic advancements. Evidence once dismissed is re-examined. Witness accounts are reconsidered. Old assumptions are challenged. Sometimes, the conclusion changes. Sometimes, it does not. But the reappearance itself reveals something important. Silence was never agreement. Innocence claims that persist after death challenge the very idea of finality. They raise uncomfortable questions. If truth arrives too late, does it still matter? If error is acknowledged after irreversibility, is that justice? If a system admits fallibility but resists accountability, what changes? These questions do not seek easy answers. They demand long attention. Over time, these cases influence reform. Not always dramatically, not always immediately, but quietly, persistently. New standards for evidence preservation, improved interrogation protocols, better forensic oversight, increased access to post-conviction review. Reform rarely arrives as apology. It arrives as adjustment. But reform does not undo. It does not return time. It does not restore presence. It does not answer every question left behind. What it offers instead is responsibility, a recognition that systems must learn from their most irreversible outcomes. For the public, these stories leave a residue. Viewers who once believed the system was infallible begin to question. Those who trusted certainty begin to tolerate doubt. Those who never thought about the process now understand its complexity. This shift is subtle, but powerful. It changes how society defines justice. Memory becomes the final battleground. Who is remembered as guilty? Who is remembered as doubtful? Who is remembered at all? Narratives shape legacy long after verdicts lose relevance. And narratives are shaped by those willing to keep telling the story. Some innocence claim cases become symbols, not of individual guilt or innocence, but of systemic tension. They are referenced in debates, classrooms, courtrooms, and reform discussions. They represent caution rather than conclusion. Their power lies in what they expose. Silence also affects those who work the case. Attorneys reflect on decisions. Judges review opinions. Investigators reconsider early assumptions. Prison staff remember moments that never made records. The system is not a single entity. It is made of people, and people carry memory differently. For many, the most difficult part is uncertainty, not knowing, and never being able to know whether the outcome aligned with truth. Living with that ambiguity requires emotional maturity that societies rarely encourage. Certainty is comforting. Ambiguity is honest. This chapter is not an argument. It is an invitation to resist simplification, to accept complexity, to hold space for doubt without abandoning accountability. Justice does not require perfection, but it does require humility. When silence settles after the end, what remains is not just a case file. It is a mirror. It reflects how a society balances order with conscience, efficiency with care, finality with truth. And what we see in that reflection matters. As this documentary concludes, the question is no longer about one individual. It is about all of us. What do we demand from systems that wield irreversible power? How much uncertainty are we willing to accept? And who speaks when the subject no longer can? The final silence does not ask us to decide. It asks us to remember. Because memory is the only form of justice that continues when all other processes have stopped. And how we choose to remember determines what we are willing to change.